Hello everyone, I'm the Shades and welcome again to Shades' Soapbox. So the anime world has seen yet another massive shift. One that has already caused shockwaves in the Western anime market with consequences that we might be feeling for a long time. This is not me exaggerating here. This is legit a big deal. For the very few of you that haven't heard the news, allow me to fill you in. Several months ago, the shocking news dropped that Crunchyroll, one of the two biggest anime streaming sites out there, was being bought out by Sony Entertainment. What made this even more shocking is that Sony already had major ownership over the other big anime streaming service, Funimation. This means that Sony now has control over 92% of the anime market share. All the other anime streaming services combined don't even get a quarter of that. Now, as expected of this purchase, the two companies are now merging into a single entity. But what was surprising is the name being kept. Most people would have rightly suspected that since Sony owned them first and given its seniority overall, that it would all be under the Funimation umbrella. But it turns out they went the opposite direction instead. Yes, as we speak, all of Funimation's licensed anime is getting moved under the Orange brand instead. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, as Funimation's reputation hasn't exactly been all that stable these days. First, a history lesson on both companies. We'll start with Crunchyroll, since that one's a little less to talk about. Crunchyroll started back in 2006 as basically a pirate site, not unlike the former Kiss Anime I've talked about before. They hosted fan sub versions of anime, though never went as far as Kiss Anime did, sticking strictly to the fan subs, never posting dubbed anime from licensed properties. In 2008, they somehow managed to even get an investment of over $4 million, which companies like Bandai and Funimation didn't take too kindly to, given its gray area piracy. But the reasons for this investment soon became apparent, as they quickly made a deal with Gonzo for the legal access to some of their titles. Then, in January 2009, they made a deal with TV Tokyo to host episodes of Naruto Shippuden, which is also when Crunchyroll announced the end of their pirate ways, removing any anime they didn't have a license for. From here, this led to them getting the rights to more anime, even releasing their first DVD with 5 cm per second, and even adding manga titles to their site, like Fairy Tail and Attack on Titan. Though, even today, their manga selection is nowhere near worth the time. No joke, this is their entire manga library today. Not exactly shut up and take my money territory now, is it? In 2013, the Sheridan Group purchased the company, and with them merging with AT&T, allowed them to invest even more into the site, creating a new company, Otter Media, which took majority ownership. They then created a new umbrella company, Elation, which would house all of their streaming services, and made a new service on top of it called Verve, which would house a collection of their other streaming services as basically a one-stop shop for geek media. Another joint venture with Sumitomo then led to them investing in the production of anime themselves. Then in 2016, they made an alliance with Kadokawa, giving them exclusive rights to their anime titles for the following year. And considering that was the year of shows like Re:Zero, Erased, and Konosuba, I think we can safely say the deal worked out rather well for them. We'll come back to them in a bit, since what happens next is intrinsically linked to the other half of our sordid tale. So let's take a look at Funimation's history. And strap in, boys and girls, because it's a long one. Funimation started back in 1994 by Gen Fukunaga, whose uncle, Nagafumi Hori, was a producer at Toei and challenged Gen to make a production company. Upon doing so, Toei licensed them the Dragon Ball series for release in the States. Originally, Funimation outsourced its dubbing to other studios like BLT, Ocean Studios, and Pioneer, and even Saban Entertainment for a time. The first attempts to air the series on syndication fell flat, but in 1998, a little programming block on Cartoon Network was looking for action series to air, and Dragon Ball Z just happened to be a perfect fit. Of course, that block was Toonami, and DBZ quickly became the hottest thing in town, which opened Funimation up to grab more licenses for anime. In 2005, they were then bought out by Navarre Corporation for over $100 million, and through this new ownership and revenue stream, they were able to pick up a lot of new titles, even picking up shows originally licensed by companies like Geneon and later ADV Films, as both companies were going under during that time. This is also when Funimation began its own streaming service, signing a new deal with Toei to stream several of their shows online. While this deal lasted for a while, things began to change in 2010, as they were put up for sale, being soon bought by several investors, including Gen Fukunaga himself, while Navarre would remain on board as a distributor. They also formed a partnership with Nico Nico. Yes, the company behind the popular service Nico Nico Doga, so any titles licensed by one would be added to both. Then, given the massive success of the DBZ movie Battle of Gods, Funny formed their own theatrical division, joining forces with Universal Pictures for video distribution. This leads to the creation of Funimation Now, their own streaming service, which is now where Crunchyroll comes back into the picture. Time to bring them all together! See, in September 2016, the two companies actually formed a partnership, with select Funimation titles being subbed on Crunchyroll and vice versa, with Crunchyroll titles being dubbed by Funimation. Sadly, this deal would not last that long, as Funimation was then bought out by Sony Pictures, as they purchased a 95% stake in the company. The partnerships did continue on for a couple years after that, but then Otter Media was themselves bought out completely by AT&T, meaning the end of the two sites working together. This also led to Funimation being replaced on Verb with High Dive. Instead, Funimation made a multi-year deal with popular streaming service Hulu, with a select group of their titles now streaming there as well. It was also not long after this that Fukunaga stepped down as general manager, and they then partnered with Chinese streaming service Bilibili to license titles for Chinese markets. After that, they acquired Manga Entertainment's UK branch and made further partnerships with Right Stuff, with titles from Nozomi Entertainment being added on. By now, you begin to see how these sites became so dominant starting in the mid-2010s. Meanwhile, with Crunchyroll, after the AT&T buyout, Crunchyroll began their Crunchyroll Originals initiative. This not only allowed them to help produce anime under their own banner, but even gave them the chance to make their own original series altogether. But if you saw me over on Melch with the Monk's Geek Watch on the Crunchyroll Originals, you'll know that hasn't quite panned out very well. But part of this also involved Crunchyroll being placed under the Warner Media umbrella, placing them alongside Cartoon Network and its own nighttime block Adult Swim, and even more specifically, the revival of Toonami from back in 2012. Alongside this, they partnered with Viz Media, even buying out Viz's European branch. They also made a deal with the popular app Webtoon, producing 3 titles based on popular Webtoon series: Tower of God, God of High School, and Noblesse, all under the CR Originals line. Again, while these did fare a tad better, it still didn't hit the big one they were hoping for. Then, Viz Europe was renamed to Crunchyroll EMEA, and many Viz brands like Kaze, Anime On Demand, Anime Digital Network, and IC Movies merged to create Crunchyroll brands. AV Visionen and Elation also became Crunchyroll companies, meaning Verb was now entirely owned by Crunchyroll. This will become important very soon, I assure you. Crunchyroll's last big move on their own was a deal with Sentai Filmworks in 2020, allowing Crunchyroll to license titles like Granblend, Food Wars: The Fourth Plate, Ascendance of a Bookworm, and World Trigger, among others. While all this was going on, Sony consolidated Aniplex into Funimation, now called Funimation Global Group. This gave Funimation access to Aniplex's subsidiaries, like Wakanim, Madmen Anime Group, and Anime Lab, eventually combining the latter's catalog with their own for Australian and New Zealand audiences. Other deals included NIS America, a distribution deal with Viz Media, and Sunrise. But then, in December of 2020 came the shocker, when Sony Pictures announced it would be buying Crunchyroll from Warner Media. Of course, a merger this large would not go unnoticed, as the United States Department of Justice extended an investigation into possible antitrust issues to look into this merger. Like I said, this merger ended up giving Sony control of 92% of the market share, so there is easily a chance this could be seen as a monopoly. But it seems they were in the clear, as the deal was finalized in August of 2021. This also meant that Verb, which I mentioned was made a Crunchyroll company, would be part of this merger. And finally, on March 1st of this year, 2022, it was confirmed that Funimation, along with Wakanim and Verb, would be consolidated into Crunchyroll, even renaming Funimation Global Group into Crunchyroll LLC. This means that Funimation, a company that has been the leading force in the Western anime market for over 28 years, was gone. Despite some of Funimation's many issues, a part of me is sad to see it end so abruptly. But I also see why they did it, since Funimation's reputation hasn't exactly been the best these days. Sure, Crunchyroll has made some missteps here and there. Again, the Crunchyroll Originals, especially the absolute shit show that was High Guardian Spice. But with things like certain agenda-pushing dubs, their website being an absolute mess, and need I bring up a certain lawsuit that pushed the anime community into a goddamn civil war that still rages on to this day? Yes, I've actually looked on Twitter, and people are still being butthurt on both sides of that whole thing. I think it's safe to say that the Funimation name doesn't have the same respect as it used to. So the question remains, What are the consequences of such a merge? On the short term, a lot of good things actually come out of this deal. With them owning such a large market share, it means we now only have to pay for one service to get the majority of our anime fix. And with the selection of titles they already have under their name, that gives us plenty to choose from. And with that much influence, it'll likely be easier for more and more anime to be brought to the US. Also, while inevitably some staff might be let go, and that will be sad as hell, if the right people are kept, the Crunchyroll website and their apps on different services could be vastly improved. Both sites have recently updated their player, and they each had their pros and cons, so combining the best of each could lead to the best anime video player out there. However, it's the long-term consequences where I see some issues arise. See, with them having that much control of the anime market in the West, and even internationally, it's going to be even harder than ever for other services to compete. High Dive is their only direct competition streaming-wise, and to say their selection is lacking is an understatement at best. But this also can lead to problems when it comes to the anime industry as a whole. If any studio decides to not play ball with Crunchyroll for whatever reason, they're not going to have much leeway to go elsewhere. And what's worse, this also just might give Crunchyroll more control over what kinds of anime are being made, something we've already begun to see both it and Funimation doing recently. And with them combined, it's going to be hard not to be influenced by what they want to make, since working with them is likely going to be the best way, if not the only way, to get into the Western market. Then you consider pricing. With them in control of this much of the market, what's to stop them from jacking up the price for their subscriptions? Sure, they can say they wouldn't do such a thing, and maybe they won't, but if they did, there'd be nothing we could do about it, since giving them up would mean pretty much not being able to watch anime as a whole. Same is true for any problems their site would have. Why bother worrying about fixing bugs on their website or video players, since people are gonna have to use it one way or the other? Not gonna lie here, I honestly don't know why the DOJ let this deal through, as it doesn't take a business major to know a monopoly like this when we see one. While there are some benefits to having a one-stop shop for anime, there are also some potential drawbacks that could be devastating for the industry as a whole. And while I'm not one to condone it, I would not be surprised if we see a resurgence in piracy for anime in the years to come. Simply put, this deal is a mixed bag for me, and I'm both excited and scared as to what might come of it. For now, I'll be keeping an eye out on this one and see just where things go from here. I pray I'm wrong and this new Crunchyroll deal plays nice, but if it doesn't, we're gonna need to find some way to legally compete with this juggernaut of a company if anime hopes to continue its renaissance that we've had since the mid-2010s. Anyway, that's gonna do it for me here today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Shades, and we'll see you next time. Rock on!